Good morning and welcome to Community Conversations. I'm Vicki Green. Today we're here to get some information, some facts, debunk some myths about the legal use of cannabis, marijuana, for both adult use, which is also known as recreational use, and medical use here in Massachusetts. There's been a tremendous amount of news coverage on the issue about the retail locations that have opened, the impact on kids, what are edibles, and then who better to provide answers and clarity on this than my guest today, who is Cannabis Control Commissioner Jen Flanagan. Good morning, Jen.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you bet. I think there's, we were talking before the show, I learned a lot. I've written about this topic too. There's a lot I didn't know that I didn't know. And that's what I think the purpose of this show. And it could be a 3-hour show with everything we have, but I want people to understand who you are. You were a state rep for 4 years. You're originally from Leominster, a state senator for 8 years. It's the Worcester Middlesex District. You're from Leominster. You have a master's in mental health counseling.
Yes.
Right. So I think that comes into play with all the work you've done since. You were appointed to the Cannabis Control Commission by the governor back in 2017. And before we start, I wanted you to hear this. Senate President at the time, Stan Rosenberg, said about you, Jen Flanagan, quote, "Her academic, professional, and legislative experience make her eminently qualified to serve. She's tough but fair, and her integrity is beyond reproach." So that's a great compliment.
I appreciate that. The Senate President and I work together closely on a lot of different issues.
Well, and before you were state rep, you worked as an aide on many of these substance abuse, and this has been your issue. So who better than the governor to appoint, I think is what he's saying. And I'll keep my opinion to myself on that one because, well, I'm going to say it. I agree with him. So thanks for coming in. The legalization or adult use is also used the term recreational use, but we're going to use adult use for our purposes. And then there's medical use of cannabis. We'll use marijuana. So there's facets to this, and we could do 3 shows. I thought we'd try to get to some of the basics, how many licenses they give out, what about the cognitive impact on kids, how policing, driving while on marijuana, and more about the public affairs campaign and information campaign that the Cannabis Control Commission is doing, which is more about marijuana.org, more about mj.org. We're going to have it on our website. So recreational marijuana, adult use, is currently legal in 13 states, according to U.S. News and World Report. That came out this week. Mm-hmm. And just so people know, before I ask you, the Mass state law, and correct me if I'm wrong, so people understand the basic state law is adults over 21 can have up to an ounce of marijuana on their person and up to 10 ounces at home. In Massachusetts, we can grow up to 6 plants per person in our homes and up to 12 plants in a household of 2 or more, right?
Yes.
So according to data I saw, there are currently 22 adult use marijuana dispensary licenses that are open for business that were overseen by the Cannabis Control Commission, right?
Yes.
Okay. So is it also true that if a resident or of a city or town voted in favor of legalizing adult use marijuana in the 2016 election, if anyone listening, their town voted in favor of this, that the city council or the selectmen must enter into a community host agreement, yes, and that they don't have a choice, correct?
So what happens is that we all went to the ballot in 2016. We were then divided into yes towns and no towns, and I don't think many people understand that. If you're a yes town, meaning that more than 50% of your population voted in favor of question 4, then your administration or whoever does your negotiating will then enter into community host agreements for anyone looking to open up a marijuana establishment in your city or town. That could be cultivation, dispensary. It could be a research license, a testing license, a product manufacturing license. We have a whole list of licenses, but that your town is essentially saying that people can cite their businesses there.
Okay. And we also talked that, because I covered this in a city, and so I saw the councils going through it, the councilors may not have all agreed on it. And what's interesting, I read about you, and is this true, that you were against legalization, which is ironic.
Yes.
When you were in the state Senate, is that right?
Yeah, and I'm against the question. I was against the question. I voted against the question. I campaigned against the question. I really don't think that true policy comes from a ballot question. And I think many of the questions that you and I are going to talk about today, we see some deficiencies because it came from a ballot question, and that there was no time for the legislature, the people elected to do the representing on behalf of us citizens, to do their due diligence to come up with a law that is as comprehensive as that it should be. So it's important to understand that while my position was no against the question, my job now is to legalize this and to do my part. And as the public health appointee, I say a lot of things that people don't agree with because I tend to look at some of the health effects of this, and people just don't want to talk about that at the time.
Right. And it's not easy to go through. I think it's been, everybody said this took so long, that we legalized this, we passed this in 2016, and the first dispensary didn't open until November. And they might say, people might say, hey, listen, that's fine, I voted for it, but I don't really want it in my backyard. It can be in my town. So what's in it for the town or city with this host community agreement from a money standpoint?
Quite frankly, it's just tax dollars. The town is going to receive money from an establishment that is cited in their city or town, that the town can then determine what to use that money for. If you have a dispensary in your city or town and you're allowed to do the extra 3% on top of the 20%.
Well, can we talk about?
Sure.
Let's break it down. It's a lot of money. There's a lot of money. It doesn't all go back to your town or city. So host community agreement is made. How do you break down the tax revenue?
So the community host agreement is the agreement between the town and the establishment to say that you can get up to 3% of their dollars for impacts. So the question is, what's an impact to a town? The easiest impact to understand is a road or a bridge. If you have this facility sited on a place where there were hardly any cars and the road was never really used, and now you're going to have excessive amounts of cars going back and forth, you're going to see wear and tear. It may have to be fixed earlier than it normally would have. There's money that will be there so the city or town can then take care of that impact.
I mean, traffic is the biggest one.
Traffic is the biggest one.
Every town's worried about traffic, having to have extra police officers. Mm-hmm. Would that be something that the town would negotiate with the dispensary owner?
That would absolutely be, in my opinion, be something that they would negotiate, because if you have a cop detail there every single day, someone has to pay for that detail. Some of the other things that I've been told is, what about the number of ambulance runs? If the number of ambulance runs goes up and the wear and tear on the ambulance truck physically...
Ambulance runs for what reason?
People overconsume. They don't know what to do. They might get scared. They call 911. Obviously,
you mean the dispensary does, or a patient?
Individuals at their homes. And so because people need to do their research and they need to educate themselves about this, that's not happening all the time. And so when you get freaked out, what happens? You call 911. And the truth is that when they come to get you, the emergency personnel, there's not much that really can happen. You either need to...
And it's not cheap. An ambulance run is not cheap.
It's
if anyone's
not.
Ever seen it on their bill.
But the impact to the city is the wear and tear on the truck. How many runs a day? How many runs a week? How many personnel are on that call that they wouldn't otherwise be on another call? So the town has to determine what exactly the impacts are, and I don't think that's something the citizens really see in the negotiations.
No, they don't. So 6.25% sales tax, 10.75% excise tax on the products. The community impact fee, as you said, is an optional 3%. So that's why when you hear people maybe saying there's a 20% tax, it's broken out into all of these pieces.
Right.
That doesn't mean that the town gets 20% back.
The town doesn't get every single piece of the tax money back. The sales tax is the sales tax, whether you buy a car or whether you buy a cannabis product. The excise tax, we have excise taxes on alcohol, we have excise tax on tobacco, the same thing. And then if you have a dispensary, like I said, you're allowed the other 3% that your town can approve. That 3% will go right back to your town.
What about growing? What if you're growing like up in Fitchburg, they've cultivated and they're looking at, you're obviously granting, they're growing in other places. Does that count as, does that have to have a host community agreement?
Every single establishment has to have a community host agreement between the establishment and the town.
So so whatever revenue that cultivation, because they have to send it to a dispensary in most cases.
Or to a product manufacturer to be made into edibles or extractions or
so they're not going to obviously
like
probably take in as much.
They may not. It depends on how many people are using them as the source for the flower. So it determines what the business plans are.
All right. So a town or city approves or enters into this agreement, goes to the CCC, Cannabis Control Commission, for an adult use license. It's taken, like I said, a long time for the first two dispensaries. Everybody was complaining about it. But if you look at the last couple of months, there were issues in Northampton and Leicester, and you were hearing in Leicester, they're running out of product. They were showing on the news how the traffic was horrendous, and people were complaining who lived near there. And I think that's where you were going, saying, well, had it been legislated, we could have figured all this out. And now we have to slow down
Right.
and take a look at it kind of in hindsight.
Well, the one visual I will give you is that on day one, September 1st, 2017, when the five of us walked into our new job, the five
4
commissioners,
and
the 5 commissioners, we walked into our new job. We had 5 people in 5 cubicles with 5 computers. We had no infrastructure staff. We had no licensing staff. We didn't have an executive director. We didn't have
no legal.
We had no legal. I think one of the other departments was in state government was answering our phones and then directing the phone calls to us. We had a phone and a computer, and we were told that we needed to get our regulations done by the deadline, which means we had to have the conversations done before Christmas. And so while
Christmas of 2017.
So here we are, September 1st. We've got to get this done by December. And so while we are all working to learn about this issue as much as we possibly can, given our certain positions, while we are working to write regulation ourselves because we had no staff to do it, and while we are not allowed to talk to each other because we come under the open meeting law, so everything had to be transparent and in public, we had to make sure
Wait a minute, you're in the same. I know what an open meeting law is.
There's no more than 2 of us that can have a conversation about anything regards to this.
Oh my God.
At all.
Wait a minute. Okay, so we haven't discussed this. And again, this show, I hope people listening are going to realize, hey, I didn't know that. That would be the biggest compliment I could get. I hope somebody listening, because here's one I didn't know. And we've been talking about this before we went on the air. Open meeting law, you hear about it a lot with selectmen's meetings and public town meetings and city council meetings, that they want to go into executive session to discuss salary and negotiations and things like that. And there's rules and stipulations and laws about what has to be discussed in public. And you had said a lot of your meetings are
they're all in public.
All the Cannabis Control Commissions, you can hear it online if you can't make it into Boston. Just Google it, try and find it. It's streamed by many different things. So you're telling me, though, as a day-to-day functioning entity, body, like if you go into a state senator's office and he's got 5 aides, they can all talk. Mm-hmm. So you're saying that the 5 of you commissioners on this commission could not talk to each other because it would be considered an open meeting?
Violation.
So how did you so that was part of why we were talking about it took so long.
Right, so there's
to get
the visual.
Leicester and Northampton. Oh, my
There
goodness.
we are. And so, and I give all the credit to Commissioner Doyle, Commissioner McBride, and Commissioner Title, because Commissioner Doyle came from DPH. She had the history of medical behind her. Commissioner McBride is definitely methodical and a very smart attorney, and Commissioner McBride is an attorney who worked in the marijuana realm. So they certainly knew a lot more than I did at the time. And so writing these regs ourselves with no staff took a lot of time, but a lot of effort not to do it together. And we made sure we didn't do it together.
So what, you wrote one paragraph, legal writes another paragraph?
I had certain topics that I was responsible for. The chairman gave us all certain topics that we were responsible for, and it was our job to get those done. And then what happened was we came back in public, and we physically had those discussions on what we agreed on and disagreed on, and what we came up with the draft regulations for the first go-around.
And then did somebody have to approve the regulation? Because since it
We
wasn't
did.
through the legislature. Right. So it's not like it's the
It gets certified by the Secretary of State, but we had to approve it.
But no state senate, no state rep, none of these bodies did not have any say in any of this.
I mean,
because it was a
people
ballot question.
People sent in their thoughts on what we should do and what we
legislators?
should not do. The governor did, the administration did, some senators did, the reps did. A lot of people we got some feedback from when we had public hearings across the state. So we got feedback, but ultimately at the end of the day, it was the 5 of us. And at the same time that's happening, we're hiring staff. We're hiring staff.
Yeah, I saw there's maybe 10.
So we have up to 65 now. So
because DPA now, Department of Public Health, has brought medical use under
everybody's
you.
there.
Yeah.
So when people say it took you too long, we didn't have an infrastructure. And if people understand what happens in some of the other states, the Cannabis Commission or the cannabis regulators are involved with the alcohol regulators. Well, we're
Like in
separate
Colorado,
from the ABCC.
is that how it is?
We're separate from the ABCC here in Massachusetts. So we had to literally stand up an agency.
What's ABCC?
The
stand for?
Alcohol Beverage Commission. So we have to stand up an agency, write regulations, and hire staff. And so when people say to me, you took too long, no, we did what we had to do for the people of Massachusetts, given what we had in front of us.
Okay, so now we're past that hurdle.
Past all of it.
And now, it's gotten a little bit quiet. And when I did my research, it looks like about 1 or 2 licenses for dispensaries are being granted every month since November. We're rolling out there. But now, there is a map online. How do you figure out how many licenses for dispensaries? Is it dispensaries and cultivators or just dispensaries? How do you figure out, let's start with dispensaries. Is there a regulation that dictates how many dispensaries licenses can be given in a county?
So by law, you're allowed 20% of alcohol licenses for the number of dispensaries allowed in your town, in a yes town.
So if Worcester voted yes as a city,
and you have 100 liquor licenses, just to say as a random number, you have you're allowed 20 dispensaries to be located in your city or town. Right. Now, that starts at the municipal process. So just because you're allowed 20 doesn't mean that 20 are going to open. And we had to really make some adjustments because for someone that has one liquor license in their town, we can't exactly exempt them from having a dispensary. So we allow them to have a dispensary
if they voted yes.
If the people
voted yes. Again, that's super important. All right. So let's flip a minute to medical. How does one go about getting a medical card? And I think there's a lot more to the process than people realize. You should have the discussion with your doctor. You're not a clinician, so I'm not asking you to answer it from a medical perspective. But how does someone get a medical card?
So I think what you need to first do is look at the website and then look at the steps it takes to get a medical card. You have to see a certified doctor. Not every physician in the state of Massachusetts is part of this program.
Not only is it not every, it's that most are not.
Mm-hmm.
And is it true, from what I understand, that if a doctor is affiliated with any hospital or group that gets federal funding, like National Institutes of Health funding, like UMass or St. Vincent's or any of these hospitals that get money from the federal government, which is virtually every hospital in some way. If your doctor's affiliated with any of these hospitals, you can't just go in and ask for a prescription.
No, they're not participating. Because again, I think the first thing we have to recognize is that this is federally illegal. So when you say federally illegal, that means that the banking situation happens. That means they're not taking credit cards. That means that doctors who have DEA licenses to write scripts for narcotics are not participating in this. There's a whole host of places of people who work for certain entities who can't use this substance because they're federal employees or their paychecks come from federal dollars. And so just because we've legalized it doesn't mean that everyone can use this or everyone chooses to use this. And we need to respect the fact that once, we have to have that federal designation over us.
Right. So the medical card, let's say your doctor is at UMass Memorial Hospital, which is big in this area, or Mass General, any of them. They get research dollars. You go to your doctor in the office and they say, well, we can't prescribe it, but they refer them to where?
They would tell them, I've had doctors tell me that they tell them to Google it, that they don't tell them where to go.
Oh, they don't say Cannacare, which is a very big...
I've had some doctors say that they've told their patients Cannacare. I think it really depends on the physician and how they want to handle the conversation with their patient. And that's why I tell people all the time, talk to your doctor if you're considering this. Find out from your doctor what they're thinking and where you need to go and what you should do that's the best thing for you. If you're on other medications, this may not be good for you. If you're on something, that it would have an interaction with, you just need to have that conversation and just be aware.
But I had never even heard of Cannacare, which actually, when I Googled it, because I saw a presentation where it came up, and I said, what is that? These are groups of clinicians, and it's kind of like when you go to a group practice for anything, but I think there's 2 in Worcester, and there's several in the state.
There's several.
And you go in there and they examine you and they go through the whole thing. And it's not your doctor.
No.
But those are the people that are able
your
to
specialists.
Grant a medical card.
Yes.
Okay. And there's a lot of people that have them. And so a lot of these dispensaries are medical and adult use. But you need separate agreements for both.
You do. And so you need the community host agreement for that one. And I think back in the day, there was letters of non-opposition for the medical side. So the community host agreement is for the adult use side. I think what we're doing now is the Cannabis Control Commission we have draft regulations we're looking for public comment on, and we're telling people to submit their public comments for both medical and for adult use, because this is the one time that we have both of them that we can change what we think needs to be changed. We've learned some things since the first month that we were in our positions. and what do we want to see going forward.
How can people do that? Do they go to the Cannabis Dash?
They can go to the Cannabis Commission website, and there's an email that they can email us at, or also we're going to be out and have public hearings that are going to happen in August. One is on the 14th in Boston, and one on the 15th at Western New England School of Law in Springfield.
And those are going to be streamed?
And they're streamed, and people can submit public comment. If they don't want to physically speak in public, send us an email, send us a letter. It works. We are reading all of this. I think that citizens tend to think that people in positions such as this don't read their comments, and the truth is we are, and we're taking them into consideration going forward.
And that goes into this whole public information campaign,
Yes.
which you started, and I read you just did a website redesign, and I've seen them on TV, and there's a billboard here in Worcester County. And it's more about
Marijuana is the name of the campaign.
Is the name of the campaign, but the website is moreaboutamj.org, and that's a lot easier. So moreaboutamj.org, and it talks about things like safety tips.
It's, first and foremost, it's know the law. We want people to understand what the law is in Massachusetts. Secondly, it's safety tips, making sure people are aware what this substance can do. It is a mind-altering substance. People use it as a mind-altering substance. I think it's important that we recognize that while some people say it's safe, there are also some risks for people, and that they need to really be understanding of that. There's tips for parents on how to talk to their kids about this. I've done a lot of work with teenagers and with what I call the transitional age, the 14 to 22-year-olds who they're testing their independence, but they're still relying on mom and dad for things. I do too. I have two of them at home, and it's great to see them blossom and do what they want, but they still come back home when they need it. And trying to have that conversation, because these kids grew up with a very different message up until 2016. And so there's some confusion going on.
What do you hear kids saying?
Well, it's safe now. It's legal. Well, it's okay now. My parents can grow it at home. Well, it's not a big deal now. It's just, it's just safer than alcohol. And so
how do you answer that?
My reaction is that any type of risky behavior in any type of adolescence can cause a negative effect for you, whether it's tobacco, alcohol, cannabis, opiates, prescriptions, inhale, you name it, that things that can be used inappropriately can cause risky behaviors and then cause at-risk behaviors later. We hear about the kids who started doing things in high school and never really got through college. We hear about people who started in college and never really graduated or got through life. So I just tell them to be very aware and very open with their parents and talk to them because this is so new and we don't really have a roadmap to go from. We want people to be educated on this.
So I've also heard people say, in forums and just talking to people on the street about this, that I'd rather it be legal and they can go where it's been grown and buy it at a dispensary than get it from a buyer off the street like they did in the before this. Right. Because from what I've understood is that it's getting cut with things like fentanyl and other drugs which weren't as prevalent. It was you never knew what you could get.
Right.
I went to college in the 80s and people smoked pot. I went in Colorado, which was one of the first states to legalize. But it seems like now it's everything as like with technology, everything's moving quicker, faster, and they're adding things and cutting it. So people are saying, well, I'd rather there be a dispensary where we know that it's regulated and it was grown and it's not cut with it.
I think the biggest takeaway is that the products that are sold in the dispensaries in Massachusetts from licensed facilities are tested. And so you're getting a product that has been tested. Even when someone grows it at home, you don't know what's in that product. You don't know if there's pesticides. You don't know if it's been cut with something. You don't know a whole host of things.
Though it's legal.
And even though it's legal, doesn't necessarily make it safe for everybody. And so when you go into a dispensary, it's been tested. And so we have what's called seed to sale tracking. So the minute that seed is in that soil, we know where this plant has been. We know what's been done with it up until the point that it's actually sold at the dispensary. So I think that you have the benefit of testing. And I've told people before, there's a complaint right now about the price. It's costing more than it would cost you on the street. That's true, and I think that to some extent you're paying for your testing. You're paying to have it
It's just
safe.
like saying you're paying what your money gets you.
Exactly.
Paying what you're getting what you're paying for. Just like I'm going to buy an expensive shirt or a no-name shirt, and this one rips and this one doesn't.
Right, and I think that the important piece of it is that this is very new in Massachusetts. It's not a new industry, but it's new in Massachusetts, and until the industry levels itself out and the businesses are more accessible and there's more of them, you're going to see this for right now. And then as time goes on, as we've seen in Colorado, if you look at Colorado, it took 5 years for them to stabilize. Okay, well, we're in year 2. So we've still got some time. And other states are looking to see how we do this and if we get it right. And I think we are.
Okay, so we don't have much time, and I know we have a lot of subjects. So there's 2 big things I want to touch on. Let's talk about law enforcement. I know as a parent, it's concerned. As a driver, it concerns me about how and whether or not people can be stopped for this. And the way that I understand it is that I'm skipping ahead here. Is that I want to make sure I get this information correct. An article in the Globe earlier this year was figuring out whether someone is high is based on officer observations, roadside tests, and the police can issue a charge for operating under the influence of drugs, but they can't immediately suspend somebody's driver's license like they can for alcohol. So if drivers refuse to take the breathalyzer for alcohol, they can have their license immediately suspended if they're pulled over. But obviously you can't do that because there's no breathalyzer for marijuana. And this is a big issue for people. So I know I've read that there's what they call a DRE officer, which is a drug recognition expert at police stations. And they give an assessment? Is that how it works?
So the DRE officers are specifically trained in drug recognition. That's why they're called drug recognition
experts. Are they
experts.
on the road driving? Or are they in
Some may be on the road driving. Some may be in the police stations. I know for towns that may not have one, they share DRE experts. And so it's true. Again, we came from a ballot question, so there wasn't the comprehensive legislation that would have normally have happened. The OUI laws, yes, there's OUI for any substance. I don't care if it's a sleeping aid or if it's an opiate or if it's alcohol or if it's drugs. You're allowed to be stopped for that, and the officer can certainly do a roadside test for you. There is not the breathalyzer, and there's not the piece of the law that says that you can have your license immediately suspended like there is for alcohol.
But they can bring you down to the
But
station.
they can bring you to the station, have a DRE test. The important piece of it, though, is timing, because your impairment changes over time. And that's why when people say, well, I've used a substance 2 weeks ago, it doesn't mean that I'm high now. Well, even in hours, the first couple of hours is really the point. You're making sure that are they impaired, are they not impaired? And so the DRE expert would then assess you, and then from there, depending on what charges there are, it would be determined what action gets taken. And so law enforcement really has been on the front lines of this. I can't thank them enough for the work that they've done. Being out in the roads, people just see this as a novelty. I've been behind cars where you can smell it. There's indications, there are teenagers that are trying to do it in their car and they're driving down the road. So it's really a dangerous time. There was a death on a highway not even far from here, Trooper Clarity, where that's going to go to trial and to see if that person was under the influence. So we've already had an impact here. There's already been an impact to our streets. And I think people need to be very aware. This law was passed. You want to consume this product. You have a responsibility to yourself and to the Commonwealth to do it in a safe manner. And that means to do it not behind the wheel of a car, and to do it in some place that's not going to hurt other people.
Is there technology, to your knowledge, with all the technologies going on?
They're working on
Are they
true
working
technology.
on some kind of breathalyzer equivalent?
It's not a breathalyzer, but there's an equivalent that they're trying to work on just to make sure that it can be calibrated enough and that it can be accepted. The other piece too, though, is that the courts have to catch up, and the courts have to allow the drug recognition experts to be experts in the cases that they're a part of when they go to trial. And so that piece has to also to be taken up.
Yeah, because what I understood is that, they can bring you back to the police station. They can say, all right, we're going to move forward with this. But then the DA or whoever's going to prosecute has to say, okay, I have enough material and evidence to prosecute this. But if they don't let the drug officer
be the expert,
then you have nothing to prosecute with, and you're going to lose. So why waste the taxpayers' money prosecuting the case? So that's something I think that you're continuing to look at, and that's important.
We have an OUI commission, an operating under the influence commission, which was, I think, very successful, and they came up with recommendations, which turned into the governor's operating under the influence bill that was released back in March. And also, the Executive Office of Public Safety has a public awareness campaign that if you feel different, you drive different. And they've also been partners with us and the dispensaries to have postcards in all the dispensaries with the public awareness campaign. Just anytime that we can educate people. The one thing I tell community members is that on the DPH clearinghouse, on
Department of Public Health.
the clearinghouse, you can get the 2 rack cards that we had made up for the More About
What's the
Marijuana
clearinghouse?
campaigns. It's on the DPH website. It's where all the educational information is housed for any type of public awareness
Right,
campaign.
because this campaign is a big deal. And again, you
It
just
is.
redid the website. It's very easy
It
for
is.
people to get information. That the website will be up on our website. And just with 1 minute, I want to bring up something that happened a couple of months ago. There's a statement of concern that was issued, and I know it's a big issue. We don't have
Yep.
much time. Statement of concern issued by about, if you look at the list, it's impressive. 40 made up of clinicians and psychologists, people from Mass General to psych hospitals to the Mass chapter of the National Association of Mental Illness. All of the over 40 people saying we are concerned about what this happens to the brain under the age of 25. It can cause, they're saying it. Our studies show it can cause psychosis, anxiety. What do you have to say to that super quick? And we'll get to that on another show.
I agree with them. I think that there is a statement of concern. There's always been a statement of concern. Just because they released it doesn't mean that it's new. It doesn't mean that it's not being addressed. There's over 20 points of public health considerations that are in our regulations that aren't as evident because they're in our regulations.
You'd
and
have to
people
read
don't
the whole
necessarily
thing.
want to pull them out. Our advertising, our marketing, our branding, our edibles, the THC content in the edibles, those are all public health driven. And I don't agree with MAPA when they say that it's been industry driven.
That's the Mass
Association.
to Prevention Alliance, MAPA, and they're the group that issued this public
They
statement.
did. And the thing I want to tell them is that this has been a concern since day one. It was a concern before the ballot question. It's a concern now. I'm glad they're finally catching up with us to issue a public statement of concern, but we've been doing this since day one, and we're
a lot
not
of these
going to stop.
Right, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but a lot of these doctors and physicians, you've consulted with these people
Mm-hmm.
as you're putting these regulations together, so it's nothing new. All right, so unfortunately we have to wrap up. We'll be putting the moreaboutmja.org website on our station website, so everybody understands. I just want you to understand that Cannabis Control Commission site, I counted on that site 23 guidance documents that can be downloaded for anyone interested in pursuing any part of the marijuana business, whether it's cultivating, retail sales, distribution, transportation, you name it, it's on their website. So we will also post the Cannabis Control Commission's website. If you want information, you can download. If you're thinking of getting into the business, download that. So thank you to my guest, Cannabis Control Commissioner Jen Flanagan. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Former state senator and state rep originally from Leominster. Please come back so we can go and finish this.
Anytime.
Because there's so
Happy
much.
to be here.
All right, so that's Community Conversations for today. I'm Vicki Green. Make it a wonderful day. Leg.